Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Lake County. I'm Chris Cleveland, and I'm your service leader today. My pronouns are she and her. I'm joined today with Rev Snavely in person, not on the screens. Okay. And we also have Betsy, Dustin, and Doug helping us with tech, and Terry and Paulette on the piano today. I encourage you to read your weekly bulletin. It has all the information. If you open the attachment, all the things going on here, and there's a lot. Today we will be having our congregational meeting after the service. There will be a very short break, no coffee and cookies until after the meeting. And as far as I know, the meeting will be broadcast on Zoom. And so members on Zoom who wish to go to the meeting can just remain on the same link, and it will appear, and they will even be able to speak at the meeting. The meeting will include an election of members of the Board of Trustees, a presentation of the proposed fiscal year 2024 budget, and remarks by Reverend Snavely. An opportunity for members of the congregation to state their hopes and dreams for our congregation and priorities. And as I said, the Zoom members will be able to speak, and following the meeting, we will be rewarded with a potluck. Even if you didn't bring something, come. There'll be plenty of food. How many people here use Facebook? Well, we need your help. The Communications Committee would love to have someone volunteer to update our Facebook page once a week, listing the service for the next week and the discussion group on Sunday and any other special events that might occur. So if you are interested in doing that, you can contact Barb Morrow or by email, or email the office at uulakecounty.org. If you are that someone, please, somebody volunteer. Next Sunday, our service on Easter, Rev Cynthia will be speaking on the dying and rising gods. And the discussion group at 9:30 will be Karen Woolhouse reporting on our congregational initiatives. So welcome, everyone. Dustin, can we greet those who are joining us on Zoom today? So look up at your screens. And there they are. Hi, folks. If anyone is here for the first time or returning after a long absence and is willing to introduce yourself, please raise your hand and a microphone will come to you. And you can tell us what brought you here today and who you are. Does somebody have the mic? Okay. Anybody like to speak? All right.
Hi, my name is Ernie Rossi. I've been coming here many years. But I've been out ill for a while. And I'm so glad to be back.
We are so glad you're back. Both of you. And his lovely wife, Jenna, as well. Anybody else wish to introduce yourself? Okay. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your Sunday morning with us. It's a good way to be together and start the week. We gratefully acknowledge that we are now the stewards of the traditional lands of the Timucua Native peoples who lived on this land about 10,000 years ago. And I'm guessing they lived more sustainably than we do. And hopefully we can look to them as role models for how we can live in the future and take care of this land and share it with all of nature. Reverend Cynthia has our opening words today.
Orthodox Hasidic Rabbi Shimon Reichik said, "The message of Passover remains as powerful as ever. Freedom is won, not on the battlefield, but in the classroom and the home. Teach your children the history of freedom if you want them never to lose it." And I'll turn it back to Chris for our chalice lighting.
Our chalice lighting is a tradition UU churches share all over the world. Hear the words of Dillman Baker's sorrels as we light our chalice. For holy days, on which we recall old stories, we light the flame. For Passover, which reminds us of the courage and strength of those seeking freedom in the past, we light the flame. For Easter, which reminds us that love is our greatest challenge, we light the flame. For gathering today in this sacred space, we light the flame. And for the opportunity to be together as a community, to remember the past, to plan for our future, and to be alive in our present, we light the flame. Join us in singing Spirit of Life. It will be on the screens, and we stay seated for this. Spirit of God, come unto me, sing my heart, all stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, giving love the shape of justice. We set me free, Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Each week, we offer time for you to share your joys and concerns by placing a stone or stones in the stand. There is a station at both the front and the back of the sanctuary. As we now silently remember the joys, concerns, and sorrows of others, let us include those who died in tragedies, too many tragedies this past week, and their families and friends who must deal with their loss. The students, teachers, and staff who were killed this Monday in Nashville. Our service people who died in Wednesday's helicopter crash in Kentucky. The migrants who perished in the detention center fire in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. The people of the Middle American communities who lost lives, homes, and businesses to Friday's storms. May we hold them all, as well as our own joys and sorrows in our heart. If you wish to share silently, you may move to one of the stations. If anyone wishes to share aloud, raise your hand and wait for the microphone.
To your right.
I just wanted to share a joy. My mother celebrated her 100th birthday this past week, and we had a celebration here in the social hall, and I want to thank everybody in the congregation who helped make it happen and came to wish her a happy birthday. She comes to the Tai Chi here, so the Tai Chi group came and helped her celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you. If there is someone who hasn't been named that you hold concern for, you may name them aloud now.
Rosalie.
Down.
For all those named, and for those whose names are too tender to speak, we collectively hold them in the light of our compassion and the warmth of our community. Chris will now lead us in meditation and movement.
So Tai Chi will be our reflection for today. You can stay in your seat and just meditate, or you can participate from your seat or standing, or just watch. So go wherever you want to be. Breathe deeply. Thank you.
Let us join together in sharing this congregation's covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and through service we live our principles. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Our interlude today is a recording from YouTube. It was actually recorded last year in Ukraine.
These bakers in Ukraine make 700 pounds of Passover matzahs a day, even as Russian forces advance. When we filmed at the Tiferes Hamatzos bakery, the city of Dnipro wasn't invaded, but it was surrounded by war zones. For many here, making this sacred bread feels more important than ever.
Да еще плюс у нас через несколько дней будет святой праздник, праздник Песах.
This would have been illegal back when their country was part of the Soviet Union. At one point, Jews were jailed for making or even just eating matzah. But these days, the country supplies an estimated 20% of all handmade matzah to the US market.
And now we're back again, sending out the best matzah, the real matzah, throughout the whole world.
Still, more than half of Americans buy matzah that comes off an assembly line. The last family-owned matzah maker in America, called Streitz, can produce up to 1 million square-shaped sheets in a day. And it's been at it for nearly a century. Whether it's machine-made or handmade, many Jews have dedicated their lives to preserving what they call the bread of the poor. So how did this traditional food grow into a $110 million industry? Handmade matzah, called shmora, or guarded in Hebrew, is what the Ukrainian bakery Tiferes Hamatzos specializes in making.
You have to keep and you have to secure the matzah.
This is Rabbi Meir Stomler. He inherited the business from his father 12 years ago. Today, he supervises the work in accordance with Jewish law. The bakery grinds the wheat on site, and Rabbi Stomler regulates the amount of heat and moisture to keep the dough from rising.
This is custom made for us, making sure it doesn't get heated too much from the moment that the wheat is in the field. And if it has any contact with water, that is already a problem.
The unleavened bread is made of just 2 ingredients, flour and water. But making the dough is labor-intensive. Joseph says this helps him keep his mind off of what's happening outside.
Люди продолжают жить, опять продолжают выполнять наш святой долг, работают в мацапекарне.
It's all made by hand. It's going to take him about a minute until it's ready.
From there, it's a race against the clock because the dough has to make it to the oven in just 18 minutes so it doesn't rise.
When the Jews left Egypt, didn't have time to bake their bread, so they had it very fast, and what they ate was matzah.
And everyone who touches the matzot until it's baked must be observant Jews. This metal rod helps workers knead the dough faster.
He's making sure that it's being well done, so this is a real piece of dough.
Then they roll it into long logs and flatten it out with rolling pins. When it makes it to the oven, it bakes fast.
Maximum 10 seconds, you'll see it's out of the oven, and this is a ready matzah to eat for the Seder night.
Production has been going strong despite the Russian invasion. This would be unthinkable in previous generations. The city's chief rabbi, Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, was arrested and exiled in 1939 for providing matzah for the region's Jews. But since the fall of the Soviet Union, Dnipro now has the most Jews per capita of any city in Ukraine. The massive 7-branched menorah center and surrounding neighborhood has become a hub for war relief efforts. Russia has targeted Ukrainian missiles on the outskirts of the city, and Dniepro's airport was recently attacked.
They don't have time to be afraid. We're busy with saving lives, evacuations, humanitarian aid, making sure they get whatever they need, the medicines and food, and really saving lives 24/7. There's no time to be afraid. There's no time to think about it.
Rabbi Stombler, a member of the Chabad Hasidic movement, takes pride in contributing to this renaissance with matzah made the old-fashioned way. The constant supervision and labor makes shmura matzah 3 to 6 times more expensive than machine-made. Even though the biggest shipments left Ukraine earlier this year, the bakery exports right up until the Passover holiday.
Это маца, которая отправляется в Америку. Очень вкусная, очень хорошая, очень тонкая. Всю мацу, которую мы делаем с любовью и отправляем в Америку.
Ukraine normally exports about 70 tons of matzah each year, but war is getting in the way. Rabbi Stombler said he had 2 containers full of matzah temporarily stuck at the ports in late February.
I goofed. My apologies to the people online. I forgot to unmute me once the video was over. A Passover joke. A Jewish Brit is waiting in line to be knighted by the Queen. He is to kneel in front of her and recite a sentence in Latin when she taps him on the shoulders with her sword. However, when his turn comes, he panics in the excitement of the moment and forgets the Latin. Then, thinking fast, he recites the only other sentence he knows in a language other than English, which he remembers from the Passover Seder. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mi kol halelo. Puzzled, Her Majesty turns to her advisor and whispered, "Why is this night different from all other nights?" Obviously, a number of you understood, despite my mangled Hebrew, that what the British Jewish Knight said was the introduction to the 4 questions asked by the youngest child at the Passover Seder. Why is this night different from all other nights? On all other nights, we eat either bread or matzah. Why on this night do we eat only matzah? On all other nights, we eat herbs of any kind. Why on this night do we eat only bitter herbs? On all other nights, we do not dip our herbs even once. Why on this night do we dip them twice? On all other nights, we eat either sitting or leaning. Why on this night do we eat while leaning? Now, different Haggadahs or Passover ritual services will word the answers differently. These answers are from a humanist modern version of Haggadah by Esther Hargitay. Matzah is the symbol of our affliction and our freedom. Legend has it that when Moses and his followers fled Egypt, they moved so quickly that the bread they baked did not have time to rise. However, scholars have noted that long before the Jews celebrated Passover, farmers of the Middle East celebrated Khan HaMatzah, the festival of unleavened bread at this time of year. This was a festival where unleavened bread was made from the new grain harvest that took place at this time of the year. The old fermented dough was thrown out so that last year's grain would not be mixed with this year's. Therefore, the new season began with the eating of unleavened bread, matzah. Later on, the Jewish people incorporated this agricultural festival into the celebration of freedom and renewal we now call Passover. Let us all eat a piece of matzah, which obviously we won't at the moment, but we can later. Bitter herbs. Tradition says that this root is to remind us of the time of our slavery. We force ourselves to taste pain so that we may more readily value pleasure. Scholars inform us that bitter herbs were eaten at the spring festival in ancient times. The sharpness of the taste awakened the senses and made the people feel at one with nature's revival. Thus, the horseradish is the stimulus of life, reminding us that struggle is better than the complacent acceptance of injustice. Let us all eat the bitter herbs. Dipping. The first time, the salty taste reminds us of the tears we cried when we were slaves. The second time, the salt water and the green help us to remember the ocean and green plants and the earth, from which we get air and water and food that enables us to live. Let us all dip the parsley in salt water twice. Reclining. This question goes back to ancient times in Rome, when it was the custom for rich people to eat while lying on a couch, leaning on one elbow, as slaves or servants fed them. The Jewish people thought of this relaxed type of eating as a sign of freedom and prosperity. So they would lean to one side, eating at the Seder on Passover, the festival of freedom. Today, we are free to eat while sitting up, even at Passover, but the question remains in the service as a reminder of how it was when our people longed for freedom. Passover begins this Wednesday at sunset and lasts till sunset on Thursday, the 13th. When the Hebrews left Egypt, they prepared for the short term by making bread quickly enough that they did not even have time to let it rise. They couldn't exactly make bread and keep it against the day that they would have a chance to go, but they knew that day was coming. They prepared for that day ahead of time in ways that they could. In Exodus chapter 3, it is written, "Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any women living in her house for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians." Now, depending on your point of view, you could say it was plunder, or you could say it was reparations. Today is this congregation's annual meeting and the start of the pledge drive for your fiscal year that begins in July. Taking a cue from the Exodus story, it is important to think both of immediate needs and long-term ones. In the midst of the COVID pandemic, illustrator, textile designer, and writer Michaela Ezra wrote, "This Pesach, this Passover, the spiritual concept of a yin, nothingness, has been popping up a lot in things I am listening to and reading. When the Israelites left Egypt, their destination was unknown. They had no map, no guideline for what lay ahead, no idea how long it would take them, how they would sustain themselves. They entered a desert and the realm of a yin, which required complete surrender, trust, and faith on their part. Globally, we've entered our own version of this, a yin, as all the structures, plans, and calendars we've come to depend on are suspended. We enter new territory without any promise as to its length or form. But we have a belief and a tradition which teaches us that out of the yin, the most beautiful and surprising manifestations can arise, that the empty spaces are potent grounds for rebirth and discovery. I hope this Pesach brings us closer to that. Vaccines were developed and we got them. You could say that was our matzah, what got us out of Egypt. But now comes the journey through the wilderness. How do we come back as a congregation from years of being online only? That is going to take a commitment of time, talent, and treasure. Think about what you can offer as you participate in the annual meeting, thinking about priorities, and as you consider your next year's pledge. To escape Egypt, to cross the wilderness, to enter the promised land. The Hebrews needed bread, literal bread, and bread, dough, in the sense of things that could be exchanged for other things. There's a reason we call money bread. For them, it was the gold, silver, and clothes they took from the Egyptians. For us, it's the money. Short-term needs and long-term needs needed to be considered. There would be various phases of their journey and of ours. On the required reading list for the first of the required training classes for interim ministry, transition ministry, the work of the leader. The second class is transition ministry, the work of the congregation. But in the first class, one of the required books was by William Bridges, Managing Transitions, Making the Most of Change. It's actually a book for business management. But one of the references throughout is to Moses. Bridges says there are 3 phases of transition. 1, letting go of the old ways and the old identity people had. The first phase of transition is an ending and the time when you need to help people to deal with their losses. 2, going through an in-between time when the old is gone, but the new isn't fully operational. We call this time the neutral zone. It's when the critical psychological realignments and repatternings take place. And 3, coming out of the transition and making a new beginning. That's when people develop the new identity, experience the new energy, and discover the new sense of purpose that makes the change begin to work. Because transition is a process by which people unplug from an old world and plug into a new world. We can say that transition begins with an ending and finishes with a beginning. Bridges says, the neutral zone is like the wilderness through which Moses led his people. That took 40 years, you remember, not because they were lost, but because the generation that had known Egypt had to die off before the Israelites could enter the promised land. Taken literally, that's a pretty discouraging idea, that things won't really change until a whole generation of workers dies. But on a less literal level, the message of Moses' long journey through the wilderness is both less daunting and more applicable to your situation. The outlook, attitudes, values, self-images, and ways of thinking that were functional in the past have to die before people can be ready for life in the present. Moses took care of transition's ending phase when he led his people out of Egypt, but it was the 40 years in the neutral zone wilderness that got Egypt out of his people. It won't take you 40 years, but you aren't going to be able to do it in a few weeks either. Moses, along with his brother Aaron, got the people to flee Egypt physically. But when things got hard in the wilderness, the book of Exodus says, the Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. As Bridges put it, the ending wasn't finished until not only were the people out of Egypt, but Egypt was also out of the people. But even when this ending was complete, the people weren't ready for the promised land. Bridges says there is an in-between phase that involves going through an in-between time when the old is gone, but the new isn't fully operational. We call this time the neutral zone. It's when the critical psychological realignments and repatternings take place. What does it mean to be Israelites or Jews and not be Egyptian slaves? That's a big change, and it's not going to happen overnight. Moses goes to Mount Sinai to receive a new code of ethics for this new people. But the book of Exodus says, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him. Then the Lord said to Moses up there on that mountain, go down, because your people whom you brought out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, these are your gods, Israel, who have brought you out of Egypt. Now, following that incident in the story, there's a whole lot of back and forth between Moses and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God says to Moses, done with you. I'm not having anything to do with this stiff-necked people. And Moses pleads with God, but you brought us out of Egypt. You have to be our God. You have to stay with us. In the story, it takes some time for these people to become this God's and for this God to become this people's. The Israelites do eventually enter the promised land. There is a beginning of this people as a new nation. And all of the story, the ending, leaving Egypt, the transition, the 40 years in the wilderness, and the new beginning, entering the promised land, make this people who they are. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, rules for living in the new land are laid out. Do not deprive the foreigner or the fatherless of justice, or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. That is why I command you to do this. When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back and get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the works of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. That is why I command you to do this. When the people first left Egypt, they longed for a life of slavery if it meant they wouldn't be hungry. By the time they entered the promised land, they did not propose the common solution of the time for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Sell yourself to us as our slaves. They found ways to provide for these people while still allowing them their dignity and their freedom. All of us as individuals and all of our institutions regularly go through Bridges' 3 phases of transition. Letting go of old ways and old identities, going through in between times when the old is gone but the new isn't fully there yet, and coming out of the transition and making a new beginning. This is when people develop the new identity, experience the new energy, and discover the new sense of purpose that makes the change begin to work. Beating an addiction, having a baby, retiring from a job, going from no minister to a minister, going from one minister to a different minister, moving from one building to another, building a building, all require endings, transitions, and beginnings. The Passover Haggadah ends next year in Jerusalem. Dassé Berkowitz, another organizational consultant, says, I am always struck when Israelis, especially Jerusalemites, say next year in Jerusalem, with the same intention as their diaspora kin. Jerusalem surely cannot only represent a physical destination, it must represent more, an ideal, a hope, a possibility. Next year in Jerusalem. Just remember, it takes a journey through the wilderness to get there. Our closing hymn is number 146. Soon the day will arrive.
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile with a wondering whether on that day when the clouds will appear. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if you care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Some have dreamed, some have died to make a bright tomorrow, and no vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with hope not in sorrow, and the promise to make a new start. Oh, today, God is talking today. Hashanah, oh, today, God is talking today.
My tradition is not Judaism, and so I am turning over the closing words to Bernie Greenberg.
Thank you. What?
You're taller than I am.
I am? That's because I spent a lot of time in the desert. Now, this is going to be, some of it's going to be in Hebrew.
Sorry, I still lost the top of your head there. Okay.
How am I doing? Can you see me? Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech olam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech olam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivonu ahalet masa. Blessed are you, our God, ruler of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Blessed are you, our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with holy laws and commanded us to eat matzah. You will have a chance to eat some matzah in the potluck with a special topping called charosis, which is chopped apples, nuts, and cinnamon.
Which represents the mortar of the bricks.
Oh, you're not even Jewish, you knew that.
Wait.
It's like being in the desert, 40
Okay, they're up there. All right. Yes? Okay.
I just wanted to make an announcement because there may be some people that do not know that Kristen received his kidney and is in Shands Hospital doing well. All right.
Thank you. I had asked Kristen if I could share that at Joys and Concerns, but I hadn't heard back. So
I've just been like 40 years in the desert, waiting.
Please rise for our chalice extinguishing. We will share these words aloud together, and then we will stay standing and sing Weave to end our service. And everything will be on the screens. Whoops. We need the chalice extinguishing words, please. Dustin, thank you. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. We'll send our energy to our neighbors as we sing Weave. Ready? Weave us together. Weave us together in unity and love. Weave us together. Weave us together. Together in love. Come back for the meeting in a few minutes.